All right, picking up right from where we left off, in this video I wanted to take a look at the way that Studio One handles comping. All right, first things first, let me hide and disable this track. We will give ourselves a fresh track over here. This time, make it another bright color. This time we'll go with pink. And I'm going to be using, for the majority, I always tend to use auto input monitoring. So that's just a side note. I make sure that tape style is enabled, and then I'm just record arming the track for any different recording that I work with. Okay, so like we learned in the last video, we can open up the record panel and we can choose to record kind of like in a single mode where we don't get any layers, but we can still do punch-ins, pre-roll, auto punch, or whatever the case might be. Or if you prefer, you can work in a takes to layers workflow, which means that no matter what, it's always going to put any subsequent track that gets recorded over top. It will always put it on its own track. Now, obviously, when you combine that with something like loop recording, which we have a loop enabled over here, this will continuously play back the same range and it will be continuously recording. And this is how you would record your different takes. Or you could just continuously start recording from the same spot and they will always give you a new track. Now, with respect to the way that Logic handles comping and Studio One handles comping, I think you'd be pretty happy to know that there is not a huge difference. I want to move to a very specific section over here. Let's move to here. Okay, and I need to unmute all these tracks. Maybe we'll move to bar 9. Okay, that's a good spot to be. One thing that I do want to do though is I don't need any of this. I'm going to just mute these events. Okay, also I'm going to pull these all down. Like I said, we have that similar selection-based groups. Okay, I'm still using, in terms of my metronome setup, I'm still using the logical click preset that we created. I'm going to add a tiny offbeat though. Okay, so that works for me. I have this gain stage the way that I like. I'm actually going to hide the listen bus. This is something that we're going to focus on in a later video down the line. But for now, we know the way that I'm working is with my device block size set to 32. My dropout protection is set to high. Let's drop that to medium. I don't think it needs to be high. Click apply and okay. All right, so now we have enabled our takes to layers in our record panel. I'm going to hide this record panel now. These are the two different ways that Studio One can work. When it comes to different artists, they really like to work, they say, okay, just loop the verse. I'm going to do 4 or 5 takes, and then we're going to move to the pre-chorus, chorus. Other artists want to work on a single track, and they want to comp or they want to do punch-ins as they go. If they mess up, they go, stop that, let's punch in before that word. And they aim to get a final recorded take as they go. So it's part of their workflow. Depending on how different artists work, I will swap back and forth between these two. It's very easy to just open this up. And also I have this programmed to a key command, which allows me to do this very quickly without even having to open this up. Okay, I'm going to switch my monitoring over here and I'm going to go into tape style monitoring. So I've record enabled this track. Let's set a loop range for something. Okay, I've got an idea. I'm going to drag across here and I want to set a 2-bar loop range. So the idea here is that we want to record takes to layers and we want them to go into takes. And this is going to allow you to get an opportunity to see the way Studio One comping works, which is actually very similar to the way that Logic works. I'm going to manually give myself maybe, I don't need a full bar, but maybe 2 notes of pre-roll. I'm going to press record, and what's going to happen is it's going to move through the minute we hop into the loop brace. It's automatically going to be recording. We may have an earlier recorded section for the very first take, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just basically going to do a count off with the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. So I've recorded this. Let's hide our console. Now, one thing that might be different that you notice over here is in Logic, if I was to have done that, it would have automatically expanded these. There is actually a preference that is you can set. It's in Preferences, Audio, and I think it's in Editing. Expand layers after recording takes. If you choose this preference, then the minute you're done recording your takes, it will auto expand the layers. So let's just leave that on for now. The main reason I take this off is if I'm ever recording drums and I'm using a group and I have 8 tracks and I do, 2 or 3 takes, it expands everything. It's a little overbearing. So I tend to leave that off by default. Okay. I'm going to just select this very beginning piece over here. Let's just delete this. Now, how do we expand these layers? Okay, we right click the track header and you can see expand layers. It's very easy to do. Also, we have a way that we can do this just by mouse clicking. Whoops, this one right over here. I can expand these layers just like this. One key difference we have between Studio One though and Logic in terms of the way that it handles recording things with respect to layers is if you do the same thing in Logic, you get a little packet. So let me make sure that in Studio One, let me take myself out of record mode in Studio One. Let's hop over to Logic for a moment. I'm going to drop into record mode and also I'm going to make sure that I'm input monitoring. If I was to do something similar in Logic, if I go like this, let's just record a little section of audio over here. Okay, now I'm going to go back basically to the beginning of that. Let's record another section of audio. Okay, so these are kind of seen independently. They're little packets, and on this one, maybe I have just 2 takes. Let's disable this auto resizing thing. I'm going to collapse this one again. Let's go back to the beginning here. I'm going to record another take. So we're doing now 3 takes over top of this, and I'll talk for a little bit longer. Okay, so on this one, I have 3 takes. I've got take 1, take 2, take 3. And if I go back to this one, I just have take 1 and take 2. Now these are also seen individually in that if I wanted to flatten and merge this over here, that this one has been flattened and merged, and now I can edit this, but this one is still kind of in that packet. So this is a difference when compared to Studio One. Let me hop back into record mode here. In Studio One, if I was to move this loop brace down, I'm going to hold Command and just drag this over. Maybe we'll move this one over to here. Here I'm going to drop straight into record mode. Watch what ends up happening. Now we've also changed that auto expand preference. So just at the beginning of the loop, this time I'm going to do it properly. I want to do a 2-bar count off, but I want to do 1. Then the second pass, I'll do 2. Third pass, I'll do 3. And I think I did 4 passes here. Yeah, I did 4. Okay. We're going to do the same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Notice that what happens over here is anything that you do in terms of a take, this we can see on all of the tracks. So whereas Logic handles with kind of like a region-based packet that you can expand with that little icon, that arrow icon in the corner, in Studio One, if you created another take on this track over here, let's move back to this one. I'm going to click P to just auto snap this into place. I'm going to do the exact same thing, and also notice that this auto expanded the minute we were done. I'm going to do one more, and I'm just going to say 5, 2, 3, 4. 5, 2, 3, 4. 5, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now notice that we have over here, we have a different section, and this is now available as a blank spot. So you have to kind of be aware of the way that Studio One works. It's a little bit different than Logic, but it's very, very similar. Now, another thing that we see, in fact, I'm going to undo that just so we can kind of keep the symmetry over here. Another thing that we see is in Studio One, we have take 1, take 2, take 3, take 4. Let's hop over to Logic for a moment. And in Logic, we have take 1 and we have take 2. So whereas Logic goes from the bottom to the top, in Studio One, we actually have the opposite order. It goes from the top to the bottom. But with that minor difference aside, there is not that much of a difference. Now, in terms of comping, you'll be happy to know that it pretty much works the same. So we can hover our cursor over here and we get this quick swipe comp tool. And as I comp across, you'll notice over here that I can comp between these different takes. This one over here, we'll use a little bit of this one, and maybe we'll use the very end of that. Also notice that we see different colors, but this is very similar in terms of a comparison to the way that Logic Pro works. But there's a couple differences that I really, really like with Studio One, is that it's very easy to basically, let me just come out of record mode for a second. I'm going to take my record monitor off. It's very easy. If you have a take that, say, is a little bit more quiet, you can adjust the event gain, just like this over here, for any one of these. Another thing that's different between Logic and Studio One is I could have this collapsed, meaning that I haven't even expanded the layers. And there's some key commands where I can kind of toggle through these different events, and Option or Alt G and H, rather Option H or Option G, I can toggle to the previous and next take. And I'll be able to see these different colors, which indicates that it's coming from a different take. So this to me is pretty useful in a context where I'm comping together. Now I like to do a waveform data zoom when I do this. I also like to take my snapping off. This is going to feel familiar. We can grab any one of these bounds. And also another thing that's going to feel familiar is that Studio One has automatically added these crossfades into all of the events. So as you comp, this is immediately available now to play back, and you shouldn't have any clicks or pops, with the exception of if you're cutting in between words or something like that, then that would obviously make a difference. But let's clean up this comp a little bit. I could choose, okay, I want to have everything from this take over here. Now in Logic, if you single click on an area such as this, one click would automatically transfer you to what was done on this take. In Studio One, it's similar, but it's just a double click. So you now need to double click instead of single click, and we can kind of listen to the different results. And this is the way that I tend to work a lot of the time. This is very similar to Logic Pro. And it's interesting because when I did use Logic Pro, this was one of the things that I absolutely loved, was how Logic handled comping. So Studio One is very, very familiar with, like I said, with a couple different exceptions in terms of being able to do event gain. Another thing that's really nice is that, let's say you're comping things together and it sounds good, but maybe the timing is a little bit off. We can also pair that with some other key commands. Like if I hold down Option and Command, and I hover my cursor in the bottom section of the audio event, notice we get this tool. This allows me to slip the audio events without changing what's happened in the take that it came from. I can now slip this around just to kind of finesse this timing between takes. So a lot of time you say to yourself, oh, that's a great take. The timing's just a little bit off. Then you can tighten up these different timings on these different sections, just like that. It's a really, really useful tool. And if you kind of do the audio slipping to adjust the timing, and then you're also grabbing these event gain handles, it can be a really, really powerful workflow in terms of comping. And like I said, anytime you can just adjust these. I can use the slider to go from left to right over here. I can also hover my cursor directly on any of the edits within the actual takes. So very, very similar in terms of comparing Studio One to comping in Logic. Very, very similar. Before we move on, I want to talk about something that I find to be very different, in that in Studio One, with the ARA integration, I know Logic does have ARA integration. It is pretty smooth, but with Studio One, you have a lot of different ways that we can integrate with ARA. My absolute favorite thing is just being able to load up Melodyne on these individual events. We're going to move over. I'll move this into view. So Melodyne has automatically detected this, and these are instantly available to edit in Melodyne, and I could adjust the tuning, the velocity, or anything like that. And this allows me to kind of stay in a temporary state where I'm still comping, but I'm actually doing my final tuning pass and everything as I'm going. And then, of course, it responds to any fades or anything like that that you want to do as well. Just a really awesome workflow in terms of being able to do this. Now, let's actually remove everything. Let me just undo that. We'll undo our edit with Melodyne. There's one other thing that Studio One has, which Logic does not have. If we right-click, we can choose to view a gain envelope. And what this is basically, if you've ever used Pro Tools, this is very much like dynamic-based clip gain. So in addition to having an event gain that we can adjust over here, let me do a bit of a data zoom. If I had anything that was like a sibilant or anything, I could adjust this, and now this is dynamic-based clip gain, and this uses Studio One's awesome tools and the ability to curve your clip gain lines and everything like that. And then, of course, it also functions similar to just editing regular automation points in Logic. So when you kind of combine everything together, between being able to comp in a very similar fashion to the way that we can do in Logic, expand these layers, choose this section for this one, I'll choose this for this, I'll choose this for this, this one will have this one, and this one will maybe have this one. When you combine that with being able to edit without having to even open up the lanes, our Alt or Option G or H, and I can scroll through and cycle through these different takes. I can also slip things if I need to. I can use event gain for general inconsistencies, like if something was sung really, really loud over here. And then for inconsistencies within one event block or one phrase, I can just right-click and I can enable my gain envelope. And then, of course, we know that we can also do these types of adjustments. And then adding, of course, Melodyne on top of that, and then the ability to do our event handles and fades. And then kind of like the icing on the cake for me is once I have a comp and it's working, and maybe I've done some different clip gain on different sections and I've had to do some event gain to kind of pull this all together, I will just swipe across here. I'm going to click G, which turns this into kind of like, the only way I can say this is that it's kind of like the benefits of consolidating this, but underneath, we still have all the individual clip edits and everything like that that are happening. So if I take a look at this in the editor, notice we're still looking at these individual events with event gain, clip gain, and everything like that. But one major difference being that now I can move this and it will move as one unit. Now, when we're talking about moving events, like what I just did, let me click undo. Let's open up the inspector, and I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. Notice this layers follows events option over here. I mentioned I was going to take a look at this in a later video. Let's open up our layers over here, which I'm doing with a shortcut to expand the layers, but we can also do it just by clicking this layers icon over here. If I take all of these events, okay, and I highlight them, if I have layers follows events, notice that all of the takes within those layers, everything follows. If I deselect this and I move this, notice that these all stay the same. So this is entirely up to you in your workflow in terms of if or how you want to use this. I use this sometimes where I want to leave everything alone, but I might want to move this and do some further editing, and I don't want to mess up my original performances. Then I might deselect this option. But if I'm doing any editing where I need to move these and I need all the layers to be kept in time with the original main comp, then I definitely would leave that on. Okay, so we have one more preference, which we're getting pretty long in this video, but we might as well go through this last preference. I'm going to hide and disable this track. Let's create a new track for ourselves to work with. And in this case, we're going to go with a different color. Maybe we'll go with a bright red, something like that. I'm just going to kind of zoom this into view to be like a full screen. I'm going to open up my record panel again. Let's disable takes to layers. And in this case, I'm going to do something slightly different. I like the idea of counting along because this will be easy for us to follow. I'm going to deselect layers follow events. And in this case, I'm going to choose play overlaps. This is going to be a little bit awkward, but I'm going to record enable this track. I'm just going to switch my monitor so I'm monitoring what's happening in the software. And now in this case, I want to kind of combine a couple things. So first things first, I want this to be my punch range that I'm using. So I'm actually going to switch to auto punch mode. And when we're in auto punch mode over here, keep in mind we have to set our pre-roll manually. I'm going to take it out of loop record mode though, because I don't want it to continuously loop. But this is the punch in mode that I want to set. I'm going to give myself 1 bar of pre-roll, which I've just kind of moved back and set that manually. And I'm going to record 2 different performances, but I've enabled my play overlaps. So I'm just going to record this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's bring our audio waveform zoom back to what it was normally. Okay, so for this next one, I'm going to open up my click track and I'm going to really crank the offbeat and maybe I'll just do these two. So let's have a listen to what this click track sounds like. Okay, perfect. Let's leave our pre-roll manually set to here, and I'm going to record over this passage, and it's going to record the exact amount of time, but this time I'm going to do the end. I'm going to do all the offbeats. So I'm just going to enable record. End. Okay. So notice what happens here. We have two audio waveforms that are superimposed over top of each other. I'm just going to switch my monitoring back so I can hear myself. Watch what happens now when I play this. I'm going to solo this out. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Okay, I'm going to take my click off. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... I got to be honest with you. This one messes with my head a little bit, and then we have some options in terms of event. I can either send to front or send to back. So if I wanted to have either one of these, and I can also peel this back, and then I'm looking at these two different audio events. There are cases where you may have a verse where there's a bit of an overlap, and I suppose this in those cases that this mode would be useful. But to be honest, in those cases, I would probably just go to a checkerboard workflow where I'd kind of have like an A and a B, as opposed to doing them both in the same track. That being said, maybe this is useful to somebody. I haven't quite found a use case where I've ever used it, with the exception of maybe I'm editing things together and there's literally, if there's like one overlap in a whole entire track, where there might be a tiny bit of overlap with a pickup on like a verse or a pre-chorus with the previous line, then I might actually enable this preference, but I wouldn't record it that way. I might use a cut track, but then I would move both of the audio events on top of each other and just enable this preference simply so it will play the overlaps on a single track. So I don't have to waste another track for setting up different processing or something like that. Anyways, we covered a ton of ground there. I'm really happy with that video. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how to create cue mixes in Studio One, and then I think we're going to be really in good shape in terms of getting moving and starting the recording process. So we'll catch you for more in the next video.